Hello and welcome back to Underlab. Two of the strongest fighters in Undertale have to be Undyne and Asgore. Not only are they responsible for a couple of extremely tough boss fights, they're clad from head to toe in what appears to be metal armour, while carrying devastating two-handed weapons. While most monsters are known for how peaceful they are, Asgore and Undyne must be the epitome of what a monster who's willing to fight looks like. So the question is, which one of them would win in a fight? This isn't about how difficult their boss battles are, but rather which way the law of the game points as to who would best who. Let's not waste any time, as I'm pretty sure Undyne is already getting impatient. And so let's find out which one of them would win in a fight. You may be wondering why Undyne would ever fight Asgore in the first place. Well, it's not really the question I'm asking here. The context of why the two might be fighting could help to determine the winner. Truthfully, it's very unlikely that Undyne would ever have a reason to attack her king. After all, her number one priority is his protection as captain of the Royal Guard. In all probability, the two would likely only fight as part of a spar or honourable duel. Asgore may want to test Undyne's skills, or vice versa. Therefore, we can quite safely rule out that it would be a fight to the death. Only through pure speculation would they end up fighting each other, with the genuine intent of harming one another. So I think it's more sensible that they'd fight each other for the sake of practice and nothing more. Still, that doesn't mean either one of them will hold back, seeing how wounds in the world of Undertale are healed by simply eating food. In that case, who would win? One thing worth considering is where the two might end up fighting each other. Would the Judgment Hall really be the best place for it? In that case, it seems like Undyne would have a tremendous advantage. With those huge pillars in the way, Asgore wouldn't have much room to swing about his trident, while Undyne could easily jab at him from afar with her spears. To make matters worse, if they started at opposite ends of the corridor, Undyne would have a huge advantage due to her ability to throw spear after spear like javelins. Asgore doesn't appear to have any sort of range attack apart from the fireballs he uses on us when fighting him, and for all we know, those don't travel as far as Undyne's spears. There's very little doubting that the terrain the two fight upon is a huge factor in determining the winner. For the sake of fairness, somewhere wide and spacious with no obstacles would have to be their arena, such as Asgore's throne room. Here, they'd have nothing more than their equipment and skills to best one another. We can start with the knowledge that Asgore was once without a doubt a better fighter than Undyne. That's because he trained her until she was finally able to beat him, and the two were finally evenly matched. However, just because Undyne won on that singular occasion, it doesn't mean she'd beat Asgore every time from there on out. You have to remember that she sparred with Asgore countless times before then, and every time she lost. Asgore's knowledge of martial warfare seems to date back centuries, as a monster that clearly resembles him is depicted during the introduction of the game. We know this was far in the past, due to the fact that the humans are shown wielding swords and magical scepters, rather than guns and modern weaponry. When we reach the surface during present day, it's full of skyscrapers and all manner of things that prove the monsters have been underground for a very long time. Whilst monsters only age when they have a child, and because Asriel has spent most of his time dead, Asgore hasn't been aging. Therefore, who knows what incredible amounts of skills and experience he's retained over the years. He certainly still knows how to fight, as he proves when we have to battle him. Despite this, he hasn't been keeping himself in shape. During the end of the game, we see Asgore in a comically pink shirt. Suffice to say, the weight he's depicted as isn't exactly flattering. He clearly appears to be quite overweight. When fighting him, we could make the error of believing that he's simply broad-chested. However, it seems almost without a doubt that the King of Monsters really is rather fat. I've no doubt that this wasn't always the case, and it clearly isn't just dreamer physiology, because Asriel as a grown man looks rather thin. It's no surprise that Asgore hasn't been keeping himself in shape. We see no training dummy outside of his home, like we do with Undyne, and it seems rather than combat, he's been practicing his gardening skills instead. Asgore seems to have entered a state of great depression ever since his son died and Toriel left him. This makes him vulnerable, and is likely the reason he doesn't strive to keep himself ready for whatever might happen. When we the player fight Asgore, he actually seems to want to be beaten because he's so depressed. Still, in the context of his hypothetical fight with Undyne, he probably wouldn't be so glum, considering that the two would just be sparring. Another important consideration to take into account is that if they're not fighting to the death, Undyne's undying form won't have much of an impact. Her natural determination will still be an advantage, of course, but it isn't a guaranteed win for her. While Undyne is being denied one of her greatest powers, things do even out a bit when we consider that Asgore almost certainly wouldn't absorb the 6 human souls for the sake of this fight. Should he do so, it would be over almost instantly, as when monster and human souls merge, they transform the monster into something equivalent to a god. So with everything in mind, who would come out on top? As long as Undyne can keep Asgore at a distance, she'd probably have the advantage. However, the second they close in, Asgore's bulking huge trident is going to give him an edge over the captain of the Royal Guard. One thing worth remembering is that we can only weaken Asgore's defences by talking to him or eating Toriel's pie in front of him. I've no doubt that Undyne would have no time for talking, and so though it seems that Asgore is easily distracted, his foe probably wouldn't exploit this weakness. Asgore, on the other hand, will almost certainly know Undyne's every move. Having taught her, her only option would be to improvise if she doesn't want him to perfectly counter her every time. This is of course assuming that he's still fit enough to keep up with Undyne's agility. She'll undoubtedly have the advantage here, as she's completely relentless. As we see when we're chased throughout Waterfall, she doesn't slow down once, and she only becomes weakened and exhausted should you lure her into Hotland. It's unlikely that the fight would ever take place there though, as both Undyne and Asgore with his thick fur would be drastically affected by the extreme heat. Sticking to the wide open space of Asgore's throne room, there's no chance that Undyne is going to get tired out anytime soon. She'd surely be able to keep Asgore on his toes until he shows some sign of exhaustion. At this point she'd strike and probably win the duel, if the goal is to draw first blood. If the two are willing to keep fighting however until the other's health drops to a critical level, then Asgore may still come out on top. Despite Undyne being fitter and more athletic, Asgore surely still has a tremendous amount of endurance and stamina left. He could shrug off her attempts to chip away at him with her spear before delivering an overpowering blow with his trident. Something else we haven't considered yet is that Undyne is evidently weak to heat. She practically starts to melt when in Hotland. As we know, dreamers can conjure flames, and Asgore is no exception to this rule. If there were no limits on the duel, Asgore would almost certainly utilise his fire magic, which would surely deal huge amounts of damage to Undyne. Asgore has no clear weaknesses other than his own psychology, but Undyne doesn't really seem like someone who'd know how to make use of that. She isn't out of the fight yet though. Asgore doesn't appear to have the ability to just set things on fire, and he can only harness his magic through fireball-like projectiles. With her smaller frame and powerful legs, Undyne would likely be able to dodge these, and so her weakness to Asgore's flames might not be as undermining as we first thought. We also don't know with absolute certainty that the magical blazes are as hot and dangerous as real fire. We surely don't see the full extent of what magic can do in Undertale, and so the idea of Undyne utilising some of her powers to create a shield that can deflect Asgore's fireballs doesn't seem entirely far-fetched. Still, Undyne has been left on the defensive. The second she tries to strike, Asgore could summon more fireballs. She'd have to look for an opportunity where he's either recovering or is otherwise distracted, as she isn't going to be able to fight back as long as he capitalises on her greatest weakness. Perhaps Asgore's psyche could still have an effect though. He may realise that using his fire magic on Undyne is somewhat unfair, and because of the king's tendency to be gentle and noble, he'd probably switch to using only his trident, putting them on even ground once more. Who's the better fighter? A huge point to think about is that Undyne actually gives us a spear to defend ourselves with during the fight with her if you read the text. With Asgore, we can simply dodge his cumbersome trident. That suggests that Undyne is far more accurate with her blows, to the extent that the only way to avoid them is to parry them. So who overall is the winner? Considering everything we've been over, I think it would be Undyne. Asgore would surely win if he kept using his fire magic, but I've no doubt that he would feel too merciful towards his favourite student and give up on exploiting her weakness. Ironically, Asgore's one weakness would then be responsible for her defeating him. At the end of the day though, the two characters are surely good friends, considering their roles as captain and king, and so the friendly duel would likely end with nothing less than a congratulation from Asgore. Of course, both of them can be easily defeated by a small yellow child with a toy knife, so take everything I just said with a pinch of salt. I hope you can see how I've come to my conclusion, though feel free to suggest any more ways that one might beat the other. As I mentioned throughout the video, there's so many variables to consider. For example, are they fighting for real, or just sparring like I suggested? In a real fight, Undyne's determination may come into play, changing things entirely, but then Asgore may resort to absorbing a human soul or two. It's just speculative fun. Be sure to tell me if you enjoyed this video, and if you did, which two characters you would like me to pit against each other the most. What about Papyrus versus Toriel, or Sans versus the Fallen Human without their ability to reload? Anyhow, try not to get on the bad side of either Undyne or Asgore, and I'll see you next time. Before I go, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to my patrons, my head scientists Asgore and She, Cameron Vigil, Kay Jensen and Sophronius, and my Underlab scientists Crystal Sleet, Nicholas Dux, Armin Arler, Marisa Ray, Corey Kidwell, Yushio Coroni, Sarah Wydra and Emily Gatewood. Thanks to the generosity of every name you see here, this channel is able to keep going. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out the Patreon link below, as well as the video that explains why I'd so massively appreciate your contribution.